Well, welcome everybody to the Farm Committee meeting. I'll call the meeting to order. You see the agenda there. Let's start with a motion to approve the agenda that's in front of us there in the board effects materials.
Kevin, I'll move that as Jeannie.
Thanks, Jeannie. Second. Okay.
Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick. Any conflicts of interest to declare by anyone on the phone?
None.
Nope.
Okay, hearing none. Let's move right into the consent agenda. I think I'll just start out by assuming we've all had a chance to read the draft minutes from the February 26th meeting, the last one which we actually held in person. Can I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll move that, Kevin, as Jeannie.
Thanks. Second.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor? Okay, thanks. Okay, well then, let's turn to page 5, which is the highlight of the key messages. And I guess I'll turn it over to you, Lisa, for that. Is that where we're going next?
Sure, Kevin, we can do that.
Participant is now joining.
Good morning, Lisa. I'll turn it over to you and we can walk through. I would just open up by saying there's it's a fulsome agenda, but it's most of what we have to cover is actually in the subsequent events, which is the two big subsequent events are the COVID-19, obviously, and then the Sidewalk Labs decision on Quayside and their impact. So, but we'll go through the materials. Feel free to jump in with any questions. There's a couple of items for approval today, and including one capital approval. So with that, Lisa, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin, and good morning, everyone. So with respect to the key highlights, this table that you see in front of you basically highlights the key areas in the meeting materials. And you'll see there's a few items highlighted there for approval. And so I just wanted to make that note that there are actually 3 items for approval. 4 items are highlighted, but we're requesting 3 items for approval. Those include item 4, our year-end audited financial statements, and they will be approved or requested to be approved for consideration and recommendation to the board after the presentation from our external auditors, BDO, who are also attending this virtual meeting. We have, as Kevin mentioned, a capital approval related to York Street Park, item number 7 for approval. And then we have another approval in the closed session related to internal audit fees.
Lisa, I'm sorry. Somebody's typing away. If they can just put it on mute while they're typing, that'd be great, because we can hear the typing all the way through.
Yeah, thanks. The key highlights does show item 6, our integrated annual report for approval on here. However, today we are not requesting approval of this document from the Farm Committee. The document's not in final draft form, and the farm's approval of our audited financial statements reflects key approvals of financial information that do get reflected into that document. So the rest of the agenda is for information and discussion. I will just make some comments on the macro dashboard, which is not specifically covered in the highlights because there's a number of documents in the highlights that are in the macro dashboard. So Kevin, if you're okay with that, and I know if you could just move to the macro dashboard. You just want to move back one, yeah. So this macro dashboard reports on the overall health of 3 key areas of interest to the Farm Committee. The first one relates to our 2019-20 corporate plan performance, and there's 4 key areas that we're reporting on. And really what this does is report against how we performed against the board approved corporate plan for our fiscal year 19-20. And overall, we were substantially in line with plan with respect to our revenues, which is our money coming in, and our KPIs, which are our key performance targets linked to our mandate. However, and those are the 2 green areas. However, you'll see there's 2 red areas, and really largely due to factors of external influence, we spent 68% of what we planned, so 221 million versus 325. And we moved some of our milestone deliverables into the next fiscal year. And the bulk of that is related to Portlands, where we did have some delays in vacant possession of properties and some issues related to productivity of our cutoff walls and bridge steel fabrication, which we will catch up with. And there's no overall impact on the overall budget and deliverables related to that. I will note in our integrated annual report, which is under agenda item 6, we do have a more detailed kind of budget to actual performance and performance measurement analysis related to this first area on the macro dashboard. The second part of the macro dashboard reports on finance and administration, and it has 5 categories, 3 of which are green, being financial reporting compliance, internal audit, and liquidity, and then 2 areas which are orange. Orange really means it's a caution that some areas may not be met in terms of plan. And what's orange there is enterprise risk management, because 2 risks materialized this past quarter. The first related to business continuity from the global pandemic, and that's reported separately under number 10. There's no major issues there. I'll just make a note. And then the other relates to Sidewalk Labs withdrawing from our Quayside project, which has an impact on the timing of our development project. And we are working on our Plan B, or our Quayside 2.0 plan, which will be presented at the June board meeting. The ERP does show caution area only because while we're live, we haven't yet fully realized the benefits of the system in terms of automated reports. We have some, but we're continuing to work on that. And I will make one more note on internal audit. It's green on an overall basis because we're in line with our overall internal audit plan in terms of our planned audits. However, this quarter, the implementation rate of our recommendations from past audits was slightly down to an average of 50%. And this was largely due to resource constraints, some of which were COVID related. However, none of the outstanding recommendations fall into a high risk category. And we will catch up on those in the next 2 quarters. We also have in this section liquidity. We have that showing as green, largely because Waterfront Toronto remains in a strong cash flow position. We do have a need to mitigate some deferral of cash flows resulting from the withdrawal of Sidewalk Labs from Quayside and the potential delay in realizing land sale revenues from that development by potentially 2 years. However, the cash flow shows that we have sufficient working capital from other realization of other revenues and other projects to see us through until 2023 at this point in time. And if the committee has specific questions related to the Quayside land sale revenues and other related assumptions, I'd be happy to talk about that later in the closed session. The third part of this dashboard is on capital projects, and that talks about the overall health of our capital projects. You'll see this quarter that Portlands has changed from green, meaning in line with budget and plan, to orange, and being a caution area. And that's really due to the utility relocation risk, which may have a material impact on the budget and schedule for this project. And this will be discussed later in this meeting. Couple of other points I just want to highlight in this consent agenda and in this section. We've got a lot of exhibits that support this macro dashboard. And then we also have some other supplemental information, which includes our annual insurance program review. And while I don't propose to go through any of those in detail, I'd be pleased to answer any questions. On the annual insurance review, I will say that we did have an independent third party review our coverages to ensure that they were in line and appropriate for the size and scale of our operations, and that the insurance carriers that are underwriting our policies were solid, and they concluded that we were appropriately covered. So Kevin, that's an overview of the macro dashboard and the key corporate project reporting.
Maybe you could just, for our memories, jog us as to how management, what's the difference in management looking at an inherent risk score and a residual risk score on those, so that we understand the difference there.
Absolutely. So the inherent risk score is the risk to the corporation in terms of us potentially not meeting our strategic objectives before we layer in any mitigation plan. And then the residual risk is when we score it, when we apply what our mitigation strategy is, how that risk gets reduced down to a lower or medium or a lower level risk. So this dashboard here is not our enterprise risk register. So when we've got green, orange, and red, these are flags in terms of how we are in terms of whether we'll meet plan. So green meaning we're in line with plan, orange meaning caution we may not meet plan, red meaning we did not meet plan. And so the enterprise risk register, I know maybe if you can move forward there, that's scoring on a different basis in terms of our actual risks being inherent before we apply any mitigation, and residual being after we apply our mitigation plan. And some of them we haven't been while we've defined our mitigation plan, we haven't implemented it yet. So you'll see the two risks that have a red residual score are related to Quayside and realizing of land sale revenues, because we're developing our plan B. So we're developing our plan. However, we haven't been able to implement that plan yet, so which is why they're still red. Does that answer your question, Kevin?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And there's also a fairly extensive summary of our insurance coverage, which I think was at the request of this committee from the last meeting or one of the meetings. And so thanks to management for preparing all that. I guess I'll turn my camera on when I'm talking. I think we can take that as read, but just sort of your overall comments on the insurance. It seemed to me that just with the various boards I sit on, that we're very well protected, both from a direct and from a variety of others. That management's putting forward from that report.
Kevin, I'm sorry, you kind of cut in and out there. I didn't quite catch the question that you asked.
Just your sort of summary comments on the insurance coverage summary. My thoughts were that it was we're actually well insured, better than I would have thought on E&O and other sort of key indicators based on other boards I sit on. Anything that we should be aware of as a committee from that insurance coverage summary report?
Sure. So the conclusion that you drew from that is actually quite correct, that we had a benchmarking from our insurance broker hub international about a year ago, and they concluded the same thing, that we're kind of in the 50 to 75% percentile in terms of coverage, being like spot on versus the upper quartile. So I think the Farm Committee can take comfort from the fact that we are well covered from not only a directors and officers insurance perspective, where we have 20 million in coverage, but also from property and the commercial general liability, which is the insurance related to slip and falls and third party liability at 10 million. We're also well covered there.
Okay.
One other item I'll just point out, Kevin, because we did make a change this year, is in our crime insurance. We did increase the limit from 1 million last year to 5 million this year, because by increasing the overall limit, we're able to increase the sub-limit for social engineering frauds, which is becoming more prevalent and there's greater risk of. So our social engineering fraud coverage has been increased to 1 million of the 5 million.
Okay. Any questions from any of I think if I'm not mistaken, we're going to go to David next on the Portland's dashboard. Any questions of Lisa or anything I'm missing before we move on? Any questions from any of the committee members?
Lisa, it's Jeannie here.
Hi, Jeannie.
Regarding the insurance, we've had a 24% increase in the premium this year. Is that something we're going to expect to continue to see, or is this just a one-time because of the shift in the liability coverages?
We're hoping it's a one-time shift. There has been a definite hardening in the insurance market this year. We were pre-warned before we went out for our renewals that it was going to increase. And what's happened is we were able to retain our coverages quite well. Other organizations have seen coverage limits decrease as well as insurance rates increase. So we feel that we're still getting value for money from an insurance perspective. And our hope is that our insurance will not continue to increase at that kind of a rate. But we obviously will monitor the situation and review our coverages accordingly when we come to do this again next year.
Okay, sorry, and one more question. I noticed that we increased our coverage significantly for the East Bayfront pollution and remediation liability. Is that just to coincide with the timing of where we're at in terms of that work, or is this something that is a bit of a red flag?
It's not something that's a bit of a red flag. It's a combination of previously the 10 million limit was supplemented by an environmental reserve by the City of Toronto. And for various reasons, that reserve has decreased over time as more projects have been funded, because it comes out of the original 500 million of seed capital from the City of Toronto. So as that reserve or that self-insurance fund portion has decreased, we have supplemented by increasing the actual insurance coverage back up to the 25 million, which is previously it was 10 million insurance and 15 million in self-insurance through this reserve.
Is this something we're going to see on other projects that we have ongoing?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Welcome.
We did see a reduction in the Bayside Phase 2.
Now that's a builder's risk. It's a builder's risk policy, which is project specific. So I'll ask either David or Kevin Newson to comment on that. That may be because those aspects of the construction project have completed.
Okay.
David or Kevin?
Kevin Newson.
Is now exiting.
Okay.
That's fine. I don't need.
Kevin obviously didn't know which button to hit. So.
Yeah, it happens.
He didn't like the question apparently. Yeah, I think the issue is that Bayside Phase 2, the project is substantially complete. However, we are maintaining the builder's risk for the warranty period because we don't want there to be any issues, sub-warranty period. So I think that's the rationale, but Kevin can confirm that once he joins back on.
Understood. It was my misunderstanding. I have just two quick questions. One on the liquidity risk. Is the credit facility that we're renewing, is that the maximum that we would be able to obtain from the bank?
No, it's not the maximum we would be able to obtain from the bank. We would be able to obtain quite a substantial amount higher than that. However, we would need approval from each of the three orders of government, and typically that's at the city a council approval requirement, and at the provincial and federal governments a treasury board requirement.
So a meaningful time delay if it was required?
In terms of how long that would take to secure?
Yeah.
It's in the past it's about a year.
Okay.
Yeah, but with the bank it's much quicker, obviously.
That I realize,
Yeah.
but it's more within the context of if we were looking for the approval, it might have made sense to look to bump that up a little bit. And then there's this cybersecurity. Just given that we're working from home more, it would seem to me that should be. I know there are some deadlines coming up for June, but the expect that we would prioritize cybersecurity audit as a result of
Is now joining.
Yes, and
Go ahead, Lisa. I'm sorry. I'll come in after. Go ahead.
Yeah, And we have been, we've prioritized all of the high risk recommendations have been implemented since the original audit, and the remaining ones are more of for extra protection, shall I say. They're not like recommendations related to high risk. And George is probably going to comment that we just put everybody in our organization through mandatory cybersecurity training, 90-minute training each in the last month because of the increased risks related to cyber frauds, particularly during the global pandemic and everyone working from home.
Yeah, and Patrick, it's Kevin. I did have a call with George and Ian yesterday to ask them to prioritize those items that the cybersecurity items and the corporate governance items over the course of the summer here. Well, we've got a little bit of a maybe down period to bring some of those things a little bit more current. And my observation was that it's not that they're things we're not doing. It's just that we haven't got them properly documented at this point. So, and
Kevin.
got that commitment from George and Ian yesterday.
Thanks.
Is now
Kevin, can I just
exiting.
update a couple things there real quick?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, George.
Yeah, so I think Lisa hit the one point. We recognize the risk and we're addressing the cybersecurity, and we made sure every employee went through training to mitigate the risk going forward of some of the attacks that we're seeing. And we're not the only ones saying this. Cybersecurity is a big issue across the board for all organizations. Patrick, on the borrowing, you do have a valid point. We are going to be talking to our government partners about borrowing capacity to see whether we want to assure ourselves that we have the ability to borrow more in the future within reason. So that is a discussion we will be having with our intergovernmental committee.
And just for my guide, at the moment, when we draw down, we don't have to advise them of our having drawn down. It's within our limits, and we go from there.
Yeah, we don't have to ask for approvals, right, Lisa? But we do keep them informed.
Okay.
Sorry, George, could you just repeat that?
In terms of once we have the authorities, we don't have to go back and ask to borrow. We can borrow and just keep them informed, right?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct.
I don't know, maybe in a first phase to try to get an increased limit in a timely fashion. That could be something that you engage where before drawing down, you would, above the 40 million, you would say that you would advise them and the reason for it. Just, but at least it provides you with a more timely access to liquidity. Anyhow, we can take that offline.
Yeah, the one thing I would assure you is, Lisa and Kevin said, we're in a good fiscal capacity in terms of liquidity for at least the next little while. But as we get closer to 2023, we really do need to reassess our capacity.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. I think then we're going to turn it over to David, aren't we, for an update on the Portlands? What page are we on to the materials now? That's 30.
I think it's 33.
33, thanks. Okay.
33.
Yep, over to you then, David.
Sorry, I think we went right to the end of the dashboard. There we go. This report is as at, pardon me, March 31st. So you'll see in the dashboard that schedule, risk, and budget are all green, although we are now reporting yellow on risk, which we will discuss later in the meeting. But as far as budget and schedule goes, we are continuing to track to the board approval and the contribution agreement approval from governments in terms of the overall budget at $1.185 billion and substantial completion of the project by March 31st, 2024. We are currently in the process of updating estimates based on 90% drawing. So this is our third stage gate after 30 and 60%. We expect to have this work done by the end of the summer and be back to the Farm Committee in September with updated estimates at completion. We continue to track, as I said, to the 1.185 billion commitments at the end of March. We're about 60%, 664 million, and costs incurred at that point were about $225 million. We currently have around in and about between 75 and 80% contingency, which is unallocated, available for risks and unknowns. In the past quarter, the substructure works for Cherry Street South Bridge were completed. Commenced rather, construction of the Cherry Street North Bridge. Foundations and abutments were completed, and construction of cutoff walls for the river valley were underway. So going to the very quickly through the dashboard, and I'll mostly take it as read. I will just note on the financial summary, based on our estimated completion at 60%, certain projects are forecast to be over the 30% approved budget. Other projects forecast to be under, but overall continuing to forecast the total program on budget at 1.185 billion. Moving on to the schedule status. There are currently a number of projects that are forecast to be behind schedule. However, those projects do not impact the overall project completion date through resequencing, acceleration, and modifying schedule components. We've continued to be able to track to the original project schedule. And the reason for that is that these projects, while interrelated, are not necessarily completely dependent on one another. And there are adjustments that we and the contractor can make to the schedule in order to maintain the overall schedule. I would note that there the couple of risks that have materialized since or before March 21st. Obviously, the COVID pandemic is one, and we'll have a longer discussion on that a little later in the meeting, and then an issue related to utilities, which we'll also discuss. The balance of risk, we are updating our risk registers right now, and we'll conduct another risk quantification as part of the 90% to see where we're tracking relative to the percentage probability of completion and contingency. So there are a few photos that I'll just quickly talk about. Cutoff walls for phase one. If you can move forward, I know. Cutoff walls for phase one are nearing completion. We should be complete by the end of July. Phase two cutoff walls will be complete just shortly thereafter. We've had extremely good success with the work that Rocky, the rock ripper, has been doing. In fact, the slurry wall cutoff walls are now complete. They were completed this week, and Rocky is going to be given a new job as a site superintendent, so that our communications staff continue to post work that's happening on site through the Rocky Twitter account. Rocky himself will actually be going home, however, and they're very disappointed about that. We are in the process of working with Hydro One to complete the new foundations for their relocated towers along the Don Roadway, and that work is progressing well. And we are also working on the ground stabilization, ground improvements for Cherry Street, Commissioner Street, and the Don Roadway, as those roads will start, construction of those roads will start at the end of this year. Any questions?
Kevin,
David,
can I? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeannie. I was just going to make a comment. So whenever.
oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
So no, I just as David pointed out, obviously COVID and utilities is an ongoing issue, not just with us. Those of you who Patrick from IO. I'm sure you've had issues with utilities, so we'll talk a bit about that later. But I just want to commend not just David and our team, but our contractors have been extremely helpful through the whole COVID period to keep this construction going. And I think it's actually quite remarkable that we've got as much done and stayed within the context of very little fiscal risk other than the two we mentioned.
Hey, David, it's Jeannie here. Thank you for the update. I just had a quick question at this portion of the discussion. It sounds like we are mitigating the schedule risk or the potential schedule delays by resequencing, which I followed that and it makes sense. Are we at the limit of how much we can resequence, or is there still some wiggle room in your opinion?
There is some. However, obviously the more we do it, and part of the schedule compliance is also utilization of float within the schedule, and there is float within the schedule, even within our critical path. The contractor has developed a schedule with some amount of float in the critical path because of the complexity of the project. Having said that, there are some key risks that that we would not be able to overcome. The hydro relocation or Hydro 1 networks tower relocations is one of those risks that could potentially impact us dramatically if that were to be delayed. There remains some wiggle room on some of the other tasks. For example, although we're not complete the cutoff walls for phase 1, we started the deep excavation in area 1 almost 2 months ago, and we had sufficient hydraulic protection from the cutoff walls that were already installed that we've been able to do the excavation. The dewatering is actually working extraordinarily well, and excavation is able to happen. Our original schedule assumed that excavation would not happen until after the cutoff walls were complete. So that's one of the mitigations, for example, that we're able to take advantage of. There remain a few, but the fewer we have to take, the better.
Okay, and then somewhere in the document I read that our government partners have been notified that, not that there is a delay to the schedule, that I guess they were given a heads up. Apart from that, there's no other note. I guess it was just to give them a heads up that there may be something coming.
Well, no, the reference that or the area you're referring to is in the COVID-19 update that we'll get to, and we were advised by the contractors, not just the contractor on Portland's flood protection, but the contractors that we are dealing with on our projects at the outset of the emergency measures response that the government's issued, that there was the potential that there could be cost increases and schedule delays due to COVID. So when we received that notice, yes, we put governments or we advised governments that we'd receive that notice. That was really just to give them a heads up. We're obligated to do that under our contribution agreement, but that doesn't mean that we're forecasting any cost or schedule impacts from the COVID. It just is a notice that under the contract we have to identify that there's a potential.
Okay, and sorry, one last quick question, if that's okay, Kevin. Regarding, I know that we've also been managing kind of changes in increases in budget costs by shifting scope and all of that. At what point are there no options available in terms of reducing scope as a way to manage increasing budget costs?
To date, we have not changed scope at all. We have not, we've not deleted any scope from the project. What we've been doing is optimizing the costs and the design for the project. So there are various ways to do any number of elements in the project. There's not just one way to do things. So what we're doing is working to working to maintain the budget by ensuring that we're selecting optimal, efficient and economic designs for what we're doing, and ensuring that to the best of our ability we're not actually increasing scope, and that's actually more of a risk. There are certain issues like the 100-year lake level issues that are that are scope changes that actually can drive and may drive additional costs. So we're trying to manage those scope changes, and to date, we manage them without actually deleting any of the scope that we're required to provide under the terms of the contribution agreement.
Okay,
Does that answer the
thanks.
question?
Yep, yeah, I was just wanted to, it was just a bigger question of on schedule and budget, that we still have wiggle room and options.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Kevin,
George, wanted
may?
to speak?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add is we keep Jeannie, we keep the governments informed on a regular basis. We have an executive steering committee on this project with the 3 governments. We constantly keep them informed. Plus, they actually join us on these calls and others. So they're pretty well kept up to speed. And as David said, we have made adjustments to the scope of the project, not a removal, but the rapid bus lane and others. We didn't look to pave it. We've kind of left other options available.
Great, thank you.
I just want, George, I think just a follow up to your comment about IO and some of the similar issues. I would encourage dialogue between Waterfront and IO if it already, I'm sure it happens to some degree, but certainly with claims and utilities, there's a common approach that our government partners can take on some of those, and the agency input on that, I think, is helpful and puts us all on a common footing, as we're all dealing with the same contractors. So just have a common approach.
Yeah. So Patrick, on that, sorry, George.
Yeah, no, I was going to just say, and then David, you're probably going to say the same thing. We're in constant conversation. I talked to Aaron. Also, Aaron actually sits on our capital committee, and we have dialogues on those issues directly, both between me and David directly with IO.
Yeah, so I was going to mention the same thing. We've actually just in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks had a meeting of our capital peer review committee. Aaron attended the meeting. We did talk in detail about the issues that IO are looking at from a COVID response, as well as utilities. And then Aaron put us in touch with a number of resources in his office to have further discussion. So Julius is actually speaking with some of the executives at IO on what they're doing relative to utility accommodation.
Great.
And Patrick, the only thing I would add is we are jointly also having conversations with governments about these ongoing issues. So I think we're well positioned, but I appreciate your suggestion for sure.
Yeah, no, it's just a common voice, and we'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we should keep moving in the interest of time here. I think that was everything from you, David, I take it?
Well, there were very briefly, there are 2 other dashboards, and I won't spend as much time on them because the work's essentially done. Cherry Street Stormwater, I'm happy to report that the project is now complete. Completed on budget, completed on schedule. The governments have actually extended the schedule to September 2021 for the project because of COVID. However, we've, but for a couple of minor deficiency items, we have completed the project in its entirety.
David?
Yes.
It's Lisa. You meant to say Cherry Street lake filling, didn't you? Not Cherry Street stormwater?
Yeah, it's actually Cherry Street Stormwater and lake filling is what the report is. I didn't go quite far enough, but you're right. Lake filling, I should have added that point. So it's the lake filling project is complete. So completed under, within the $65 million budget and on schedule. And we, just as a note, will not be reporting on Cherry Street any further as the project is complete. And then the final is the Bayside External Services, which is the Cherry Street Stormwater Treatment Facility. Work continues on the project. We are, the concrete core and shell is now complete, and the interior work has started, including piping equipment and interior fit up. So that project is scheduled for completion at the end of this year. I don't think we have too much else to mention on that project. Although it's, if you have a look at the photos a little further along on it, you'll see with the completion of the structure, just how interesting this project is and why it actually has already won some design awards prior to it being constructed. And finally, Bayside Phase 2 is essentially complete. The first phase of Bayside Phase 2, which is the roads and the first part of the Water's Edge Promenade, is complete at now, and there are second phases which will be done once the A1, A2 projects are completed by Tridel. We've not completed the public realm for the Water's Edge Promenade adjacent to Parliament Slip in order not to damage that or to have Tridel damage that when they're constructing the Aqua Luna condominiums. But the work that we're completing for the Aqua Bella project is now substantially complete, and Aqua Bella is looking to be completed, I think, at the end of this year. And I think that's all I had.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, David. I'll just ask management. There's another 4 reports here: the procurement exception, compliance, the fundraising, and the tri-government MOU. Is it our intention to hear from each of those individuals? Any that we want to take as read? Happy to go with your guidance on it, but we can go through them relatively quickly if that's what the intention was.
Lisa, do you want to go through quickly or just take questions?
I'm happy to take questions, George, unless you wanted to highlight anything about the tri-government MOU to the Farm Committee.
I think we should hear on that one, George. Just
yeah. So we've continued to have conversations. We have virtual agreements on the process, and this is mostly process related. So I think there's some issues with regards to what the scope of this was. So it really was how we were going to work together and report back on things, and we have agreements on that MOU. It's approved in principle back in March, and they're basically focused on process. So there's not a lot to report other than how we were going to continue to keep them informed, in particular around obviously anything that would affect their financial capacity. Lisa, did you want to add anything to that?
No, that's a pretty good summary. The other part about it is providing clarification on Waterfront Toronto's reporting on performance measures and targets and reporting against those targets, which is part of our annual report.
Yeah.
So George, just one quick question there. The board is going to see that, and are we voting on it? Like, who signs off on it?
We're bringing it to the board on the 25th. I actually sign off. It's basically documentation of the current process. There's nothing that's really changed. It is something I can talk to Steve about. I don't think the board, it's really operational. Okay. So at this point, I inform the board, but I'm not seeking approval because it really is an operational.
It's a quick aside, but within the internal audit update, I think it's page 25 of 245. There was a comment there on board member terms and knowledge transfer, and I didn't know to what extent that should be included in the MOU, just given the transfer between board members, and then the consider requesting different levels of government to explore opportunities of staggered board member terms. So yeah, just seemed to me that that should be in there.
Yeah, we've certainly tried to push for that. The dilemma there is governments like to be able to make their choices as to whether they want to stagger or not. So we can try to, and I can't remember exactly, Lisa, what we had in there on the MOU on that aspect, but I'll update the board on that on the June meeting.
Okay. that was it for me.
Okay. Yeah, certainly able to go through any of these items, but it seemed to me that there we've hit the highlights there, unless there's further questions. I think we're now going to the financial statements. Is that what's next on the list? Next on my list. I just note that typically we would, while it's a reverse order on the agenda, typically we would hear from the auditors before we would actually approve the financial statements.
That's right, Kevin. We are.
So is BDO, is representatives of BDO on the line, Lisa?
They are, Kevin. So what I had thought was we could have my colleague Sampata Shane Dane, who's our Director of Financial Management, just provide a very brief overview of the corporation's year-end financial statements in 2 to 3 minutes, and then invite BDO to speak to their report before the committee considers recommendation to the board of the financial statements.
Sounds great. Over to you on that then.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa. Thanks, Kevin. I know you might just turning to page 64 of the material. I'm just going to jump right into the statement of financial position. In the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on some key significant items of the statement of financial position, just so as to for us to get an understanding of what these items are. So the first one that I want to talk about is cash. We see that the cash is at 87 million, which is pretty high. And it's consistent with what we had maintained last year. And it's only because of the Portland's working capital that we have to maintain. Our system is that the mechanism is that the federal government and the provincial government reimburse us based on costs incurred. So we need to have that working capital from the city in advance to pay the bills. As such, that's why the cash is high. The second item that I want to focus on is on the receivables. Again, significantly high at 87 million, only because we've got receivables both from the city as well as the provincial government for the Portland's project. In fact, we've got about 40 million from the provincial government, which we are expecting to realize today in our bank account. The next item is restricted cash and investments further below. It's 27.6 million, almost 28 billion. And that's primarily as a result of the holdback liabilities. So we are setting aside certain cash aside in a separate bank account for our holdback liabilities, primarily as a result of the Portland's project, and certain other cash for public art contributions, as well as for broadband contributions, we are required to maintain in terms of agreements with our developers and the city. Next item, or the last item on this statement of financial position, is a deferred contribution. Again, we see it's at 176 million, which is high. Partly it is also because of the higher working capital that we have to maintain for the Portland's project. So this is basically revenues that we have received that we have not spent yet. As and when we spend these amounts, the deferred contributions will go down. And again, this is purely as a function of the working capital that we have for the Portlands. I'm just going to go back to another significant item under assets, which is assets under development, which is at 685 million as of March 31st, which basically, if you look at the change between the assets under development under the two periods, it tells you, so from March 31st, 2019 versus March 31st, 2020, it tells you expenditure for the year, for this current year, 1920, which is basically about 216 million or so. If we can just go to page number 65 of the material, that is a statement of financial activities. You can see that the revenues are up restricted revenues are up by about 96 million. Again, this is as a result of the provincial contributions for the Portlands, as well as the contributions from the city and the federal government for the Portlands project primarily. You can see, if you further below, the expenses, they're about 4.7 million. Now, these expenses are distinct from what we see under the statement of financial position after development. These expenses, plus the change in the assets under development for the two dates, or between the two dates, that's March 31st, 2019 and March 31st, 2020, the total expenditure for the year, which is 621 million. These expenses basically these get expensed in the statement of financial activities because they are primarily in the nature of sustainability studies, planning studies, or pre-development costs, whereas the expenditures in the statement of financial position are in the nature of assets, which WT has the corporation has ownership during the development phase. For example, parklands, or investment in parks, investment in roads and infrastructure, and these get handed over to the city or where after which the city assumes the ownership of these assets. This is, in nutshell, really a summary of the financial statements. In the interest of time, I've limited it to only the statement of financial position as well as the statement of financial activities. I'm not going into any of the notes. However, I also want to highlight that there is a distinction in terms of the revenues, how we present our revenues and statement of financial activities. Again, on page 65 itself, you will see that restricted revenues are shown on the top. These are restricted because we are supposed to use them for a specific purpose in terms of the delivery agreements with the governments. Whereas if you just scroll down to the bottom, where you see net operating income and land sale proceeds, these are basically unrestricted revenues, which there are no restrictions attached to the government, and therefore we are reporting them separately in the statement of financial activities. I'm going to ask if there are any questions related to this, and maybe then we can just go over to Jeff from BDO to present the audit report.
Any questions from any of the committee members there?
None.
Okay. Thanks, Sampata.
Thank you.
So I think on the line we have Jeff Barrett and Rob Claus from BDO Canada. And I think, Jeff, you indicated that Rob would present this report.
Yeah, Rob's going to present the report today.
Okay, over to you guys. Thanks.
Okay. Hello, so I'm Rob. So I'll walk through the final report. I'll stop at every page. It's very summary level in terms of each page. So I'll just stop at each page as we go through to see if there's any questions before I move on to the next page. So that summary page there. So from a high level, the purpose of this report is, as the auditors of Toronto Waterfront, we are required to communicate and disclose certain things to you guys from our audit and audit findings and those sorts of things. So that's what we walk through here. So starting out the status of the audit. So there are a couple things listed in the top left side there. Because we sent this report a week ago, the first two items are actually received. And then the next three items, so receipt of signed management representation letter, subsequent events review through to the financial statement approval date, and then ultimate approval by the board. Those are standard things that would be outstanding for any audit, so there's no concerns there. The next section is the materiality. So we confirmed with the farm and in February 2020 that the materiality would be $2 million, which has been consistent for a number of years. This year we kept it at $2 million, so there's no change from our planning letter. Our audit findings. So when we conduct our audit, we have a risk-based audit, and we audit the financial statements as a whole, but we focus or hone in on certain areas that we find as risks in the audit. And we'll walk through those in more detail on a later page. So on the next page, internal controls. So it's laid out a little bit more in detail on a further page, but I'll talk about it here. So as part of our audit, we are required to look at the internal controls of Waterfront Toronto from a financial reporting perspective. And if we found any significant deficiencies, we would be required to report that to you guys, the farm. We did not find any significant deficiencies to note to you guys. Independent. So as the audit firm of Waterfront Toronto, we are required to remain independent as part of the CPA Ontario guidelines and rules. So we are stating to you guys that we are independent of Waterfront Toronto up to today's date. And there is an appendix that has the letter with more details, but I won't go through that. And then unadjusted or adjusted differences. So if we did have any unadjusted differences from the audit, we would report it to you guys here. And we did not discover any unadjusted differences to report to you guys. Okay, so the next page, management representation. So this section here is basically saying that management represented to us as auditors, any information or invoices or documents that we needed. They were providing everything that we needed to allow us to complete our audit. We also get a management representation letter signed, which would be signed at the future date when the board actually approves the financial statements. And we have an appendix there, but we'll provide the letter separately to Lisa and the board at a further date. Fraud discussion. So in our audit, we conduct certain procedures. Our audit is not designed to detect fraud, but we will do specific procedures to try to see if there's anything there from a fraud perspective, because obviously from a financial reporting perspective, that is a risk for us as auditors. We do certain things such as we inquire with management, we do certain analytical work, we incorporate elements of unpredictability in our audit process. So there would be some things that we do this year that we wouldn't have done last year, just to incorporate that element of unpredictability from an auditor's perspective. We look at internal controls, we review accounting estimates, and we review journal entries, and we would obtain a business rationale for any unusual transactions. There was nothing to note there. And at this stage, we actually do, or we are required to ask the farm if you guys are aware of any fraudulent activities at the organization. So I'll pass it back to you, Kevin, just to comment on that.
Certainly, I'm not aware of any fraudulent activity, and I think I can speak for all of the other committee members. They'll pipe in if they have a difference of opinion, but we have no concerns there.
Okay, no, thank you. The next section is COVID-19. So obviously fresh on everybody's mind is COVID-19 and the issues that it's caused worldwide and within Canada. Management added a separate note disclosure in the financial statements just to discuss or make note of the impact or any impacts for COVID-19 to the organization. There wasn't any material impacts that were noted in that subsequent events note. The next page. So this is where we go to our audit findings and we walk through the specific areas. I'll keep it a little bit high level unless anybody has questions and wants to ask specific items or around these certain areas. So management override of controls. So this is actually an audit risk in any audit. Management's in a unique position to potentially override certain internal controls. So we do specific testing around that. We look at journal entries that hit certain thresholds and times to see if we can note anything unusual. If we do, we would ask management, about those transactions. As I said earlier, we incorporate elements of unpredictability. And from all the testing that we did, there was no issues or errors to note. Revenue recognition. So again, this is a standard risk in every audit because obviously revenue recognition is generally the key area for financial statements in any organization. So we do test revenue to a higher level than other financial statement areas automatically. And so when we do this testing, we get a good understanding of the controls around revenue. We actually obtain confirmations from the levels of government from revenues coming into the organization. And then anything outside of that, we would test on a sample basis and perform analytical work. So we did not have any issues there. Next page. So something new this year is the system conversion. So from moving from Microsoft Navision to D365, we were required to ensure that all the financial data went from one system to the new system. So we compare the trial balance, we look at subledgers, and we compare project costs from the old system to the new system because each project is tracked. So when we did that testing, we did not find any issues and everything was converted over to the new system appropriately. Accrued liabilities. So just because of the nature of your guys' organization, projects and construction, we do test accruals and AP to a higher level, and there was no issues there when we did our testing. Assets under development. So obviously, this is the largest piece of your statement of financial position at 685 million this year. We want to ensure accuracy and existence of those assets. So we do sample testing and control testing. And we had no issues when we did our testing there. Construction deposits, less of a matter this year versus some past years that we've done the audit, but we want to ensure the accuracy and existence of deposits, and all the testing there came back fine, and we have no errors or issues to note there. Contribution agreements. So we keep a tally of all the contribution and delivery agreements each year, and we have a register that we've kept as the years have passed. So we just tie those into the testing as it relates to each area. No issues there. Deferral of contributions. So we do a control-based test around the deferral of contributions and as well as the costs to the organization to make sure that costs are being recorded in the appropriate project and being allocated appropriately to where they have to go from a financial reporting perspective. No issues were noted there when we did our testing. So that's the audit findings. The internal control matters I did touch on earlier, so I won't go into detail there. There was no control deficiencies to note. And then the next page, it talks about some other areas that we are required to communicate. There were no issues, no disagreements with management, no issues from a going concern perspective that we found. There was no other, no consultations with other firms from an audit or accounting perspective or on matters. And then just a general management was good, and there was no other matters to disclose to you guys as an audit firm. So, and then the rest is all the appendices, which I won't go through. We have there's a draft of the auditor's report. There's an independence update, an unadjusted differences schedule, which I made reference to previously. There's a representation letter, and then there's an appendice on just the BDO resources and our website where you can find additional resources. So I don't have anything else to add unless there's any questions, or Jeff, if you have anything to add as well.
No, that was a good review of the letter. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Rob and Jeff. Any questions from the committee members? If none, thanks to BDO for their work again this year on the audit. Appreciate you and certainly appreciate the clean audit opinion. Makes our job easier at this committee. So thanks for your work on all that. And I guess with that, we'll move to approve the financial statements. Unless there's any further comments you'd like to make, Lisa?
There's just one. There is a contingent liability note on note 21. Which is page 78. We want to remove, there's a D on there related to district energy pipes. We've sold those pipes. We no longer have a contingent liability, so we're going to delete that contingent liability statement in note 21D there.
Okay. Okay, subject to that revision, I guess I would then like to accept the motion to accept the financial statements and auditor's report for 2020. Someone want to?
I'll put that forward.
I'll second that, Kevin.
Okay.
Kevin?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's Ian. Can I ask you, on the screen now is the actual resolution. I just, it's not just accepting, it's recommending to the board for approval. So if I could ask, you could do that.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So the resolution's on the bottom there.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Can I have that resolution then? I guess we just.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we're in open session, right?
We are in open session.
Be it advisable to go into closed session and then come back and approve this in open session?
What's the thought process there?
Just to give the the members of the committee a chance to be in closed session and have any discussion.
That's a good idea. It's Jeannie here.
So do we want to bring this later into the agenda after we come out of closed session? We could bring this back on the agenda. Ian, could we do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I don't have an objection to that. Okay, we'll bring that back momentarily, or not momentarily, whenever we get to it. So the next thing is on the agenda is the integrated annual report. Lisa already referenced that. It's technically not our job at Farm to recommend that to the board. We simply approve the financial statements, which are part of that, and then that report will go to the board. But it's certainly there for the committee members to review, and that I guess will come up at the June 25th board meeting. And then the next item is the good news item, which is the capital approval of the York Street Park, Love Park design. Who am I turning that over to, Lisa?
Pina and Chris. Pina Malozzi and Chris Glacier.
Okay.
Good morning. Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to briefly provide an update on the current status of the York Street Park design and construction project and set some context for the committee's review today for capital approval and tendering methodology. So Ina, if you want to go to the next slide. York Street Park, actually, do you want to go to, I think I briefly already summarized this. Why don't we go to the next slide? So York Street Park is located on the northeast corner of York Street and Queens Quay on a site of the former off-ramp to the Gardner Expressway. The off-ramp was demolished and replaced by a shorter ramp that ends at Simcoe Street. The site is about 2 acres in size, which is about 8,000 square meters. It was subject of an international design competition, which actually received over 40 bids through that procurement process. The winning design is entitled Love Park, and it was developed by a team led by Claude Cormier, paysagiste out of Montreal, together with the local architect GH3. The Love Park project includes iconic elements like a large red heart pond and a pergola covered with flowering wisteria. And I'm going to show you some images in just a second. The site is owned by Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. It was recently transferred from transportation to PFNR in 2019. However, there's a small portion of the site, 190 square meters, that is still under private ownership, and the city is working with that owner to acquire that small triangular portion in the south west corner. An RSC is required, record of site condition is required for a portion of the site, which was the location of the former highway ramp, and this is underway, being undertaken by the City of Toronto. The remainder of the site will be, we will apply risk management measures in compliance with the Ministry of the Environment's requirements. Do you want to go to the next slide, Ina? The project is included in the board-approved 2020-2021, that's a mouthful, 2020-2021 5-year rolling strategic plan with a total of 12.71 million, which is fully funded by the City of Toronto Parks Department via a delivery agreement. An additional 2.33 million is required to complete the risk management measures, the environmental components of the project, and this is also being funded by the Parks Department. An amendment to the delivery agreement is required for this, and although this is not complete yet, we are in the process of securing this. The design has been underway for about a year now. We are expected to complete drawings for tender by July of 2020 and to commence construction by the fall of 2020. The goal is to complete construction for the summer of 2022, and our current target is July 1st, 2022. We are, and I'll touch on the contracting, but we are aiming to release our pre-qualifications for the construction following the farm approval of this project. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the park is located at the corner of York Street and Queens Quay. This is actually right next door to the RBC building, right next door to our offices, essentially. And it's the red square on this drawing. Next slide. This is a photo of the site. It's a little bit greener today than what you see here, but it is largely an empty square site that has the bents from the old highway ramp are still actually on site, and it is required as part of the project to demolish those bents. They will not be maintained. It's located in quite a strategic location at the geographic center of the waterfront and a key gateway for visitors coming to the waterfront. A lot of people come down the York Street corridor to arrive at Harborfront Center. Next slide. This is the current 60% design plan for the project. As you can see, it includes a very large heart-shaped pond that has a green planted island in the middle of it. And that island is what we call Catalpa Island, has on it one of the existing trees that is on the site. There are several large existing trees, and we are aiming to maintain 5 of those existing trees as part of the construction. The pond edge is a seating height curb with red Mexican smalty tile mosaic. The pond is complemented by large areas of green planting and lawn for lounging in. And along the edge of these gardens are long rows of benches for hanging out. And because they're so long, if we're required even next summer or a couple summers from now to continue to social distance, there's lots of space for seating. There's a pergola structure. Oh, one second. There's a pergola structure, which is in the bottom right corner of this image. I don't know if you can point to it. It's the white area, which is being designed by GH3 and will be planted with wisteria. And at the northeast corner of the site, top right, you'll see oval shape. That is an area for dogs. Next slide. You can see an aerial view of the project with the dog area in the foreground, the heart pond with the red edge in the middle, and the pergola to the far left of the image. Next slide. It's another view. You can see more clearly the red mosaic tile edge on the pond and a hanging glowing heart, which is proposed to go in the middle of the park. Next slide. Just another view from the southwest entrance into the park. Next slide. As I mentioned, the delivery agreement with Parks was executed in 2019, and we're well underway on design. From a schedule perspective, in February, we completed the 60% design and cost estimating process. Since then, we've undertaken cost optimization and a risk assessment has been completed for the project, and we are on target from a budget and schedule perspective. Next slide. While we are on track, there remains risks that we continue to track for the project. I'll walk through a few. I won't go through everything on this slide, just a couple of them. First of all, at this time, I would say that the largest risks of the project is our coordination with Toronto Hydro. We have been working with Toronto Hydro to determine a power supply for the project. However, their process does not provide sufficient information for the team to properly budget for this until much later in the design process. They actually require 100% design before they can give us indication of how we're going to get power. And obviously, power is an important aspect of delivering this project. As a mitigation strategy, we are continuing to plan for the more costly possible outcomes and hope for the better, less costly items. Another risk is it's a smaller risk that the delivery agreement amendment for environmental costs will not be completed on time or with sufficient funding. We're mitigating this risk by having already started those discussions with the Parks Department immediately following receiving the 60% cost estimate for the environmental scope, so that we can secure written confirmation for this funding from the Parks Department in a timely manner. Another risk is that the tender prices come in higher. I think this is a risk for every project. Than the construction estimates at our stage gates. We continue to do construction estimates all the way through the project. The mitigation here is that we'll continue to maintain a contingency to cover these additional costs, but that will also obtain alternative prices for different, maybe less costly approaches. For example, the mosaic pond edge can be done in a few different ways, so we'll ensure in the tendering process we'll get competitive prices for some of those different methodologies. Lastly, there's a risk that COVID-19 could impact the material and labor supply, and we continue to monitor this as we move closer and closer to the tendering process. Next slide. The project is consistent with Waterfront Toronto's risk appetite statement. I would assess the project as a low to moderate risk project, given that it uses only proven technologies, largely in related applications. An example of this, and there are several on the slide, but I'll just speak to the first one, would be the mosaic tile. Is a technology proven for centuries. It was used, long before us. And while it has been used in many public settings, and a really good example of that is the Gaudi's famous Park Güell in Barcelona, it is much less frequently used in high traffic urban winter environments, and this requires some R&D on our part. We are undertaking a mock-up of this edge, and we'll monitor it through one entire winter season before authorizing the contractor to proceed with this. And as I mentioned, we're also going to be getting competitive pricing on alternatives in the event that something like this doesn't prove to be feasible. Do you want to move to the next slide? Thank you. From a contracting perspective, we have evaluated a series of different contracting methods and propose to use a general contractor lump sum tender process. First of all, because it ensures cost certainty upfront once we get the bid, and cost and schedule compliance. We would propose, as I said, issuing the request for qualifications for this tender following the farm approval of this approach. Next slide. Capital approval is required in order to complete this project because the project exceeds the $5 million threshold and has, at this point, met the minimum 30% stage gate requirement. I'm going to give a quick summary of the financials on the next slide. We are expecting to spend a total of $15.04 million on the project. $9.95 million are hard costs. That's our anticipated tender price, including the environmental and landscape construction. We're on track to spend $2.79 million on soft costs, and that includes the design and consulting costs, but it also includes Waterfront Toronto's project management costs, which are being recouped from the city for this project. We have a contingency that we're holding of $2.06 million in total, and our recently completed risk assessment has indicated that with this contingency level, we have an 85% likelihood that the project will be within budget and on schedule. And then on top of that, we are holding money for tax because we have to. In terms of the sources, as I said, this is intended to be fully funded from the City of Toronto. Parks Department, we already have the first chunk of money secured through a delivery agreement, and we're looking to amend that delivery agreement to secure the second piece of funding. Next slide. So this is the recommendation. Management recommendation is that the committee recommends to the board of directors the proposed capital investment in the project, in the York Street project, of $15.04 million, which represents an additional 2.33 from which which was previously approved as part of the rolling strategic plan. This is conditional on the execution of an amendment to the delivery agreement with the city in the form and substance satisfactory to management. And secondly, that the committee approves the recommendation of the board of directors that the project be tendered using a general contractor lump sum tender method due to cost certainty, overall cost, and schedule compliance. And I think the next slide has the motion on it.
Okay, thanks, Pina. That's an excellent presentation. Any questions from any of the committee members of Pina while we have her on the phone here?
Pina, it's Jeannie here. Thank you for the presentation. I have a few questions regarding the risk. The hydro risk, the contingencies, we have to put in a new transformer. Does our current contingency of 2.06 million cover that potential cost in the worst case scenario?
Yeah, that is the intention. We have asked the designer to preserve the minimum amount within their budget, and then the contingency would cover anything over and above that. So it's not the full 200,000 that would be drawn from the contingency.
Okay, regarding the geotechnical settlement risk, is that something that we should be worried about? I've been involved in projects where the geotech has killed projects. So we've got final reports and you guys feel pretty confident?
Correct. And we have a geotechnical consultant on the design team. So we are ensuring that the design is being delivered, to align with the conditions that we have currently found already on site.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm just asking because that's kind of a typical thing, but you flagged it as a risk. So there could be extraordinary conditions there.
Yeah, and I think this is flagged as a risk because having just completed the Jack Layton Ferry Terminal project, we found things because a lot of this is lake fill or old, waterfront edges. So we found things that were a little bit mysterious to us. So It's always a little bit of a risk. And that means when we did the Monte Carlo simulation, we were accounting for extra contingencies to cover that.
Okay. My next question is, we have a pretty aggressive schedule here in terms of timing, which was put together obviously pre-COVID. Have you guys figured out what the potential cost of delays are? Because it looks like there's 3 elements that could delay the schedule. One is the amendment agreement with the city, getting that, the sale of, completing the sale of the 2 private land portions, and then obviously COVID-19. So have you guys run kind of a worst case scenario in terms of if we don't start construction this fall?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think I would say we have run that scenario, the details of which I can't necessarily,
because there would be costs associated. Yeah, because there would be costs associated with the delay, I assume.
The one thing I can say is that we've been very fortunate on one of those. First of all, I'll go through each of them individually. The COVID-19 one, our designers actually have become more available. So we're actually accelerating the design process and we'll have drawings sooner than we expected to. So we have a bit of a float in our schedule for construction start for this October, November already. So that one I feel is a little bit less of a risk. The sale of the lands, we are meeting weekly now with parks to push this item and the environmental item. They're both items that we need to coordinate with the Parks Department. So we have now set up weekly meetings to ensure that we are on track to have both of these in place. The amendment, I expect I'll have an update and confirmation even before we get to the board meeting on. Was hoping to have it for today, but it just, they haven't been able to secure it yet. And then likewise with the sale.
Okay, quick follow-up. What's our schedule float on this? Because you said you've kind of factored something in.
So for tendering, we have for our fall start, we have, I would say from now until then, about 4 to 8 weeks of float in our schedule. That's just to October. And then beyond that, the schedule is reasonable considering what it's taken for us to deliver projects.
Okay. Sorry, last question. Regarding the trees, are we using the same Silva-cell technology that we used successfully on our waterfront walk in order to make sure that these trees actually thrive and survive?
So the trees here are planted in large open planters, which is actually the most ideal planting methodology. We don't have any planting in hardscape, which is where silvacells would be more appropriate. The one exception to that is the wisteria is in hardscape in order to work within the trellis. And so we will use, a silvacell-like technology to ensure that the wisterias are successful.
Okay, sorry, one quick question, final one, maintenance. Has the Parks Department, are they accommodating to make sure that these amazing parks that we build are actually maintained properly? Because their record so far hasn't been too great.
Well, so we did an audit of the parks that we have already built from an operations and maintenance perspective, together with the operations folks at the City of Toronto Parks Department. And there were some recommendations that came out of that process, including having operations staff involved right from day one in the design process. And so we've implemented that recommendation with this project. Our team is meeting regularly to review design drawings with operations staff so that once these projects are complete, they understand exactly what they have coming to them and they have ownership over the project. So I feel pretty confident that they're very aware of the requirements of a project like this.
Okay, thank you.
Jeannie, if I can just say, I also meet with Councillor Paula Fletcher, who this is a big issue for her. So before we ever go through approvals, we walk her through what conversations we've had both with parks and the operations part.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I was on mute. Okay, well, thanks for all those questions again. Thanks. The motion is on page 165. Is someone prepared to put forward that motion?
I'll put it forward.
Okay, seconded.
Second.
Thanks, Michael. All in favor?
Yes.
Okay, well, thanks. We look forward to following this project, Pina. It looks like an exciting one for that area of Toronto. And I have to embarrassingly admit that I had to Google what a pergola was, but good luck with the construction process and the final stages.
Thank you.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is the Portland's update from BTY Consultancy. Is that where we're going next, Lisa?
It is. We're a little bit behind schedule, Kevin. So
more than a little bit, but
yeah. So we may want to try and make up some time here. I'll defer to David Kosturin regarding the BTY report. Is there key highlights that we should present and have BTY speak to very briefly, David?
Well, I think we could do that. The alternative is we could just entertain questions, but let me just see if Joanne and Phil want to just do questions. Jeannie, I'm okay with that too, unless Joanne and Phil have something specific they want to relay.
Yeah, I would suggest the question maybe the way to do it, Joanne. Read the report. There doesn't seem to be anything of controversy in there. Is there anything that you would particularly like to highlight to the committee? And sorry to cut you short, but we are well behind on our time here.
Nothing controversial. No, that's correct. Everything was a green rating, and by everything I mean budget, scope, the risk management, and the schedule. We did do a deep dive into the schedule. There was a few matters that we flagged, which we identified 4 projects which were floating. They were still within the timeline, but they were floating in the direction of past the December 2023 date. With regards to the budget, the primary item that we flagged was the fact that we didn't have an update on the estimated cost of completion. So that the data that we had was from the previous period, which was 60% stage gate. We're expecting to have an update in the next quarter, though. The contingency, there was a little bit of movement on the contingency percentage, which had reduced, which we flagged in our report. but as I said, overall, our findings were consistent with the report in a WT CPMO. And then with scope, there were no changes at all. And then the risk, we identified, whilst there was no reported impact of COVID, WT have engaged HDR to do a more extensive study of that. We had a draft report presented to us, which we included dialogue on. We also touched on the lake level just as a matter of keeping it in our report for tracking purposes. And I understand that that's an ongoing activity, and there may be further discussion of that. Well, I'm expecting further discussion on that in future quarters, but at this time, it's just there for tracking. And that's about it in a quick summary for the timeline. But if there are any questions, yes.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry to rush you along, but any questions from any of the committee members on that?
So Joanne and Phil, sorry, it's Jeannie here. I guess for our next report, we should have some more details, I guess, on the high water and the COVID-19.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And I just wanted to validate that you had access to all the information you required.
Yes, we did. As I said, there's just one little bit of a hiccup was the estimate at completion data. We didn't have an update this quarter, and so we'll be interested to look at that next quarter. And I understand that that was just a technological issue. So we will look at that. We had verbal discussions about it, and apparently there's no major movement.
And my last question would just be on critical path, and with some of the scheduling delays, are there potential knock-on effects that we should be aware of, or are there risk mitigation strategies in place that bring you comfort?
Well, there's scope identified within the schedule, and so there is opportunity for WT and Ellis Don to reschedule works. I mean, there will eventually come to a critical point where rescheduling is not an opportunity. We flagged 4 particular projects out of the 16 which are indicated to be delayed, and these 4 was just because they were falling in that window of October to December 2023, and we had identified delays, we thought, between 8 to 10 weeks on those projects. But as I said, there's opportunity for rescheduling, and it's something we'll continue to monitor and track.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Sorry again to rush you through. Look forward to the next report. We're now on to the internal audit update from MNP. Again, with the similar time constraints. Although Veronica, is Veronica on the line?
I am.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody.
Welcome. Can you hit the highlights of your report as well, and we will then ask questions as appropriate. So over to you.
Sure, no problem. So we, for this last audit, focused on the Portland's flood protection project and looked at the procurement. And that was on the procurements done at Waterfront Toronto itself, and also the sub-procurements that are managed by the construction manager, so Ellis Don. So overall, we found that we were quite pleased on the good processes and controls that were in place for both Waterfront Toronto in-house and also the procurements done by Ellis Don, as well as there was full compliance to Waterfront's policy, which was quite nice, and had 2 low observations that we found. One of them is really on just ensuring that there's full retention of file documents, so just maintaining that. And the second one is regarding an enhancement of procurement department's performance metrics, and that's really just for continuous improvement. So that's yeah, our highlights, super fast, but totally open to answering any questions that anybody has on this internal audit that we completed.
No questions.
Veronica, you again got good cooperation from management and in your audit?
We did. This one straddled the COVID-19 pandemic and closing of locations. So we were fortunate that we had done our in-person testing before everything shut down, and we're able to go to see Ellis Don and look at their documents. So that worked out well. And then we finished off testing and that remotely. So we were able to continue and get everything that we needed to finish off and complete the audit.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for your work on that, and we'll move on from there. I believe the next thing I'm turning over to David and Lisa on the COVID-19 impact update. I don't know who's going to kick that off, but I'll turn it over to the both of you.
Yeah, David, I think you should lead this because most of this relates to construction projects.
Can do. I will assume that you've all read the cover sheet, and we'll jump straight into the presentation. So on the executive summary, obviously we're all aware, very aware of what's going on. As of the middle of March, we've identified their potential for impacts to our workforce, both on site as well as our consultant workforce in their offices, which may result in efficiency and productivity issues, labor and material mobility issues, delays related to our third parties like Hydro One Networks, City of Toronto, TRCA approvals, because we're all working in a slightly different way than we have in the past. And then all of that potentially resulting in extended overheads and escalation costs for the project. So moving on, I know. From a construction perspective, on April 3rd, the province issued the Emergency Management Act, which identified that only essential workplaces could continue from a construction perspective. We determined that 4 of the projects that we were involved with, Portland's Flood Protection, Cherry Street Stormwater, Bayside Phase 2, and Bonnycastle Public Realm, met the requirements of the Act, and those projects continued. And I'll talk about the impacts such as they are on those projects as they continued. And then on May 1st, the government issued a new series of essential workplaces, and essentially the balance of our projects have now qualify as projects that are in essential workplaces. Now, I would note that these projects are not actually under construction, but we're working towards getting them under construction. The actual impacts that we've received, both Ellis Don and at least on the Portland's Flood Protection, Ellis Don provided us a notice on March 30th that there may be impacts, and they've forwarded to us notices that they've received from some of their subtrades, including GFL, who are doing a number of different projects on the a number of different tasks on the project, as well as Cherubini Metalworks, who are doing the bridges in March and early April, identifying how they had specifically been impacted in a number of ways. We do not, at this point, have specific and direct cost and schedule impact information. However, we do estimate, based on our discussions with Ellis Don and their discussion with the trades, that those impacts are going to be immaterial to the project. We may have some project management staff costs, general contractor overheads, consultant contract administration, design delays, or future work delayed, but we are not actually seeing those as being substantial. Next. Won't go through this a whole lot of detail. We have had some issues with labor. One of the trades, GFL specifically, was running 2 shifts a day. They reduced that to 1 shift so that they didn't have to clean the equipment for the second shift. We've obviously got enhanced health and safety procedures on the site. We have had some issues related to some cross-border traffic But again, we've been able to mitigate those, particularly by keeping some of the staff that had to cross the border in Canada until the work was completed. From a third-party perspective, Hydro One Networks may be the largest risk we face. They are doing work now, which is great. They are working towards a outage window in the fall, where they would be able to do the transfer of power lines from existing towers to new towers. We expect to get the new towers in. However, Hydro One has indicated there is still a slight chance that the outage window in 2020 in the fall could change or could be modified. So we're staying on top of Hydro on that. We're not expecting that to happen actually, but it may. City of Toronto, while they suspended non-essential services, the folks that we work with and rely on to get permits and approvals have continued to work, not necessarily from their offices, and we actually haven't experienced any serious delays in permits or approvals. The only delays have actually been from the fact that the City Council hasn't been meeting on a regular basis, but we expect a variety of approvals over the next 2 months as council meetings resume, and we continue to get permits out of TRCA. With respect, so that's Port Lands flood protection. So actually no substantial risks remaining from COVID, and no substantial cost or schedule impacts have been identified or are expected at this point. With respect to other projects in the state on Lands, Cherry Street stormwater treatment facility contractor also provided a notice of potential delay in March on the 27th. Again, we have not seen any material impacts related to COVID from a labor or material perspective on this project, and do not expect any claims from either a schedule or a cost perspective. So from the construction perspective on all our projects, we really don't see any major issues at this time. We are looking at the potential for a second wave in the fall, and are therefore considering what potential mitigations we can put in place now, particularly issues like pre-ordering materials that could be affected by a second wave, and having those materials delivered to site so that we don't have any delays resulting from inability to obtain the materials we need to get the work done. And I think that's it from my perspective, and I'll turn it over to Lisa, and then I guess we can entertain questions.
Thanks, David. And great. So there's no real material impacts from a financial and accounting perspective. We've continued to operate through our cloud-based ERP system and our Office 365, which allow remote use from all of our staff who are working from home. So we've continued to pay all of our vendors on time, and we completed our year-end financial close 100% remotely. And we also completed our external audit 100% remotely using technology. I talked from a cash flow perspective earlier that we're secure and in good form. We are expecting some delays in receivables, specifically some funding related from the City of Toronto, which is expected to just be a 3-month delay to July, from April to July. However, we do have continued funding support from the provincial and federal governments. And then finally, we do have some interim use property tenants that have requested reduced rents or alternative payment schedules, and we've been making some accommodations in this regard. And we're also looking at relevant assistance programs that might assist our tenants there. And that's it.
Okay. Thanks, David and Lisa. Good report. Any questions arising out of that? Some of which we deal with in closed session, but
just a quick question here, Kevin. It's Jeannie. David, thanks for the update. I noticed in the BTY report that they said that HDR had done a risk analysis preliminary results report on April the 9th. Will they be doing a follow-up report?
Yeah, they will continue to travel to work with us to document and to assess the COVID right until we are through the entire epidemic, I guess you could say. So as long as it remains a risk, HDR will be involved and continually updating. We need to follow that and document.
When is their next report expected, and will they explore a bit more the potential if the second wave hits in the fall? You talked about mitigation right now being, procuring materials, but there could be a schedule risk if the province shuts things down again. Will HDR be doing an update to explore that?
Yeah, we haven't scheduled another update. We're updating our risk register on a monthly basis. So every month we're assessing the various risk issues. So as we receive additional information, that information is getting passed on to HDR, and they're essentially updating their risk register for all of the elements, including COVID, on a monthly basis. So we don't expect a specific additional report from them, likely until something else potentially changes. And at this moment, there haven't been any changes since the beginning of May.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else there? Okay, I'm hearing none. I think at this point, we're now ready to take a motion to move into closed session, if I'm not mistaken. Have I missed anything?
I'll move that, Kevin. It's Jeannie.
Okay. Seconded?
Sure, that's Patrick.
And I know, can you let me know? I take it we stop the recording here?
Yes, we do.
With no issues coming out of the closed session on the financial statements, can I have a motion to approve the financial statements of the corporation?
I'll put it forward.
Okay. On there.
Kevin, sorry, I apologize. The resolution is on 58. What page 58? What you're actually doing is you're recommending that the board approves it at the next meeting.
Yeah. There's the resolution. Patrick moved it, seconded.
I'll second it, Jeannie.
All in favor? Okay.
Aye.
That motion is carried. Then there's the motion on the internal audit fees.
It's on page 234 of your board book.
Okay. So can I have a motion to accept the one on page 234?
I'll move that, Jeannie.
Jeannie, seconded. Michael, thank you. All in favor?
Yes.
Yep.
And then the last one is, sorry, remind me of the last one, Ian.
It was the one that was just on the screen. The approval of the minutes of the.
Right.
Yep.
We have that motion for the minutes of the last closed session.
I'll move that, Jeannie.
Okay, Jeannie, seconded. Okay.
Second it.
Okay, all in favor? Okay, that one's carried as well. So I think that largely deals with the housekeeping items, approvals. Is there any other matters that come before us today that anyone would like to discuss?
No, that was a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's a long meeting.
It's a good meeting.
I will accept a motion to adjourn.
Make the motion.
Okay, thank you, Michael. All in favor? That is a wrap. Well, thanks everyone for their dedication over this call, and for the management and Lisa and the team for their hard work on getting us through this remote farm committee meeting. And I'll look forward to keep us up to date as things progress, George, and we'll look forward to connecting soon.
Absolutely. And I thank everybody. I know the remote meetings are tough, but we are getting through them.
Can I make one just quick suggestion?
Sure.
I know I'll do it, but it could be useful to email certain questions ahead of time, so then management can incorporate it into the discussion.
That would be great.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I have done it in the past. I apologize. And also it keeps us from being too long-winded. So, which I'm certainly at fault.